I was 7 years old when a billionaire pretended to be asleep just to see if I would steal from him. I didn't know that was what was happening. I didn't know I was being tested. I didn't know my entire future was balancing on a quiet moment in a cold room. All I knew was this: the old man in the velvet chair looked lonely. The fire crackled behind him, but it didn't warm the room. Rain slammed against the tall windows like it was angry. The house felt too big, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. And there he was, slumped in that chair, eyes closed, chest rising and falling slowly. Everyone else in that house saw a billionaire. A powerful man's. Someone to fear. I saw shaking hands. I remember standing there, my heart beating too fast for such a quiet place. My mother's words were still ringing in my ears. Don't touch anything, don't move, if he wakes up we're done. We didn't have a backup plans. We didn't have savings. This job was everything. I should have stayed still, I should have listened. But something felt wrong. The room was cold, drafty, the kind of cold that creeps into your bones without asking permission. I noticed his fingers first, pale, stiff, not relaxed the way sleeping hands should be. Then I saw the envelope. It was thick, open, full of money, sitting right next to him like it had been forgotten. Even at 7, I knew money meant survival. I knew it could buy food, shoes, heat. That's when I realized something else. The envelope was slipping, one small movement away from falling to the floor. My chest tightened. I didn't think about rules. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about tests. I stepped forward. Every sound felt loud, my shoes against the floor, my breathing, the rain outside. I pushed the envelope back onto the table just enough so it wouldn't fall. Then I felt it. Cold. The man shivered. Not dramatically, not enough for an adult to notice. Just a small, quiet tremble, the kind people miss when they're too busy watching for mistakes. I took off my jacket. It was thin, old, still damp from the rain, the only one I had. I placed it over his legs the way my mother did for me when I was sick. You're cold, I whispered. Then I stepped back. I didn't know his eyes were open, just a crack. I didn't know his heart was racing. And I definitely didn't know that in that moment. Everything he believed about people was about to collapse. Something felt wrong. I just didn't know how wrong it was going to get. My name is Leo Morgan. I'm 27 years old now, and people who meet me for the first time usually assume I've always lived comfortably. They see the office, the calm, the way I speak, and they think I grew up protected, safe. They're wrong. I was raised by a woman who learned how to smile while carrying fear in her chest. My mother, Sarah, worked harder than anyone I've ever known. Not in a dramatic way, not with speeches or complaints. She just kept going, cleaning floors, scrubbing sinks, folding sheets that weren't hers, doing work that left her hands cracked and her back stiff before she was 40. My father died when I was 4 years old, a factory accident, one phone call in the middle of the night, and suddenly our apartment felt too big and too empty at the same time. I don't remember his voice clearly anymore, but I remember his smell, oil and soap. And I remember the toy car he kept on his shelf. That car became mine after the funeral. It was the only thing I asked for. After he was gone, money stopped being something abstract. It became the reason my mother's eyes stayed open at night, the reason she counted change on the kitchen table, the reason we moved twice in 3 years. The job at the Sterling Mansion wasn't just another cleaning gig. It was survival. It paid better than anything my mother had ever had, but it came with rules. Strict ones. Mr. Arthur Sterling didn't like noise, he didn't like questions, and he definitely didn't like surprises. Everyone who worked there talked about him in whispers, how he watched people, how he tested them, how one mistake could end everything. That Saturday, when school was closed because of storm damage, my mother panicked. She had no one to leave me with. No neighbor, no family, no extra money. I remember her standing in the bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror, hands pressed to the sink, breathing slowly like she was trying not to break. She brought me with her because she had no choice. Before we entered the house, she knelt down and looked me straight in the eyes. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. Leo, she said, you have to be invisible today. I nodded. I didn't fully understand the danger, but I understood the weight in her voice. What I didn't understand was this, that the quiet boy trying not to exist was about to change the life of the most powerful man in that house. And I wasn't ready for what that would cost either of us. The Sterling Mansion didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum that people were afraid to breathe inside. The floors were so polished they reflected the ceiling lights. The walls were lined with dark wood and paintings of places I'd never been. Everything smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old paper. Even as a child, I could tell this was a place where nothing was ever touched unless it had to be. My mother moved through the house like she was walking on glass. Her shoulders were tense, her footsteps soft. She didn't talk unless spoken to. I followed her, counting my steps, afraid that even the sound of my shoes might echo too loudly. She led me into the library and pointed to a corner rug near the wall. It was thick and soft, probably worth more than everything we owned combined. "Sit here," she whispered. "Don't move, don't touch anything." Then she looked at the man in the armchair. Mr. Arthur Sterling. He sat near the fireplace, wrapped in silence. His body was slumped slightly, as if age had finally decided to claim some of its payment. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow and heavy. To anyone else, he looked asleep, peaceful even. But something about the room felt tense, like the air itself was watching. My mother hesitated before leaving. I saw it in the way her fingers tightened around her cleaning cloth. She leaned down one last time, her voice barely there. "If he wakes up," she said, "you don't speak, you don't look at him, you don't move." Then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and the sound echoed louder than it should have. I was alone. The rain outside beat against the tall windows, sharp and angry. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, each second stretching longer than the last. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the walls. I sat still, just like I promised. At first, I focused on my breathing. Slow, quiet, in and out. I watched the flames flicker. I listened to the clock. I tried not to look at the man in the chair. But time passed. My legs started to ache. My fingers felt cold. The house felt colder than it looked. That's when I noticed the small things. The way Mr. Sterling's shoulders twitched just slightly. The way his hands looked stiff instead of relaxed. The envelope on the table, thick with money, sitting too close to the edge. Something felt off. Not dangerous, just wrong. Like a room pretending to be calm. I didn't know it then, but this was the moment where silence stopped being safe. And whatever was about to happen next was already watching me. At first, nothing happened. The kind of nothing that feels heavy. The kind that makes your thoughts louder than the room. I stayed on the rug just like my mother told me. My knees were pulled to my chest. My hands were tucked under my legs to keep them warm. I counted the ticks of the clock in my head, losing track somewhere after 100. But the silence started to feel wrong. Not empty. Watchful. I risked a glance toward the armchair. Mr. Sterling hadn't moved. His eyes were still closed. His breathing was steady, but something about it felt controlled. Too even, like someone pretending to sleep instead of actually resting. I told myself I was imagining it. That's when I noticed the envelope again. It sat on the small table next to his hand, thick and open, bills peeking out like they didn't belong there. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't protected. It looked careless in a room where nothing else was. I looked back at the man's. His fingers were curled slightly tense, not loose like a sleeping person's. His jaw looked tight. My stomach twisted. I felt like I was standing in a room with a sleeping dog. One wrong move and everything would snap awake. Then I heard it. A soft shift of fabric. Barely a sound, but enough. His chest rose a little deeper than before. His head tilted just a fraction, like he was adjusting to get more comfortable. Or to listen. My heart started pounding. Loud, too loud, I was sure he could hear it. I thought about my mother in the other room. About her scrubbing floors, trying to earn a future that could disappear if I made a mistake. I imagined her face if she lost this job, the way she'd try to hide it, the way her shoulders would sink. I wanted to shrink, to disappear back into the rug. But then the envelope slid again. Just a little. The edge hung over the table, the weight of the money pulling it down. I imagined it falling, bills spilling across the floor. The sound alone would be enough to wake him. Enough to end everything. My hands went cold. I knew I shouldn't move. I knew I shouldn't touch anything. But I also knew that if the envelope fell, it would be worse. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff and shaky. Every step felt loud, even though I was barely breathing. I kept my eyes on the man in the chair, waiting for him to snap awake. He didn't. Or maybe he was waiting for me to do something worse. That thought crawled up my spine. Something felt wrong. I just didn't know how carefully this moment was being watched. I had just pushed the envelope back onto the table when the door opened. Hard, fast. My mother rushed in like she had been running. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, her breath uneven. The first thing she saw was me standing near the chair. The second thing she saw was my jacket draped over Mr. Sterling's legs. Her world collapsed in a single second. "Leo," she whispered, and my name sounded like a warning and a prayer at the same time. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and grabbed my arm, pulling me close to her side. Her hand was shaking so badly I could feel it through my sleeve. She looked at the envelope. then at the notebook on the table, then back at Mr. Sterling. She thought the worst. Her lips trembled, her voice cracked. What did you do? I opened my mouth to answer, but the chair creaked. The sound cut through the room like glass breaking. Mr. Sterling groaned, a low, irritated sound. His shoulders shifted. His head lifted slowly like a storm waking up. My mother froze. She pulled me behind her, pressing me into her back like she could shield me from what was coming. Her knees bent slightly, ready to beg if she had to. Mr. Sterling opened his eyes. They were sharp, focused, awake in a way that told me he hadn't just woken up. He scanned the room slowly, taking in everything, the jacket, the envelope, my mother's terrified face. What is all this noise? He growled. His voice was rough and deep, not loud, controlled, that was worse. My mother bowed her head. I'm so sorry, sir, I was cleaning, my son's school was closed, I had no choice. We're leaving right now. She didn't wait for permission. She grabbed my hand and started pulling me toward the door. Stop. The word cracked through the room. She froze mid-step. Mr. Sterling's gaze dropped to the chair, to the damp spot where my jacket had been. His jaw tightened. My chair, he said slowly. Italian velvet, imported. Do you know what water does to fabric like this? My mother's shoulders collapsed. I'll fix it, she said quickly. I'll clean it, I'll pay for it, please. He stood up. Even leaning on his cane, he felt tall, heavy, like the room bent around him. That damage, he said calmly, will cost $500. My mother sucked in a sharp breath, her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I don't have that, she whispered. Please, I'll work it off, I'll do anything. Then his eyes shifted. They landed on me. And you, he said, what do you have to say? My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my toy car. The only thing I had. I can give you this, I said. The room went silent, and that's when his face changed. After that moment, nothing went back to normal. Not really. Mr. Sterling didn't yell, he didn't fire my mother, he didn't order us out of the house. Instead, he dismissed her quietly and told her to finish her shift later. His voice wasn't cruel anymore. It was tired. Too tired. When my mother took me home that evening, she barely spoke. She kept replaying the moment in her head. I could tell, the test, the money, the way he'd looked at me like I had pulled something apart inside him. For days after that, we waited. Every ring of the phone made my mother flinch. Every knock at the door tightened her shoulders. She expected bad news, a termination letter, a threat, something. It didn't come. Instead, Mr. Sterling asked her to return the next week. Same hours, same pay, no mention of the chair, no mention of the money. But things were different. He started asking questions. Not obvious ones, small ones, quiet ones. How was school? What books did I like? Why did I sit so still? He watched more closely now, but not like before, not hunting for mistakes. It felt more like he was trying to understand something that didn't make sense to him. Sometimes he would pretend to read while really watching me do homework at the long table. I could feel his eyes lifting and dropping, measuring, thinking. Once I caught him staring at the toy car in my hands, the same one I'd tried to give him. His expression wasn't greedy, it was almost reverent. I started noticing things too. How he never spoke to his children on the phone without his jaw tightening. How he ate alone, even in a house built for dozens. How staff members were efficient but distant, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Late one afternoon, I overheard him arguing softly in his study. Not angry shouting, something worse, disappointment, the kind that sounds like giving up. I gave you everything, he said into the phone, and you still only want more. The line went dead. He sat there for a long time afterward, staring at nothing. That's when I realized the truth wasn't just about whether people steal money. He was investigating something deeper. Whether anyone could care about him without wanting something in return. And somehow, without meaning to, I had become part of that answer. But I didn't know yet how far he would take this search, or how dangerous truth can be when it finally shows itself. The truth didn't come all at once. It never does. It leaked out in fragments, in half-finished sentences, in silences that stretched too long. By the time I turned 15, I was spending most afternoons at the mansion. Mr. Sterling insisted on it, said the library was quieter than our apartment, better for studying. My mother didn't argue. She trusted him now, even if she didn't fully understand him. Neither did I. One evening I stayed late. The house was unusually quiet. No staff voices, no phones ringing, just the hum of old lights and the ticking clock. Mr. Sterling called me into his study. He didn't sit behind the desk. He sat on the edge of it, shoulders slumped, hands folded like he didn't know what to do with them. Leo, he said, do you know why people betray each other? I shrugged because they're scared. He smiled weakly, that's a good answer. Then he opened a folder. Inside were documents, contracts, emails printed and highlighted, names I recognized, his children, his business partners. They've been draining accounts, he said calmly, too calmly. For years, small amounts at first, enough to hide, enough to test me. My chest tightened. They thought I was too old to notice, he continued. Too tired, too busy watching strangers. He laughed once, short, bitter. All this time, he said, tapping the folder, I was testing the wrong people. That was the moment I understood the real betrayal. It wasn't just greed. It was abandonment. His children didn't visit unless they wanted something. They spoke to him like a bank, not a father. When he confronted them, they denied everything. Blamed accountants, blamed misunderstandings. He didn't fight back. Instead, he watched. He watched how they spoke about people like my mother. How they laughed at staff. How they talked about inheritance like it was already theirs. And then he watched me. A boy who didn't take money he could have. A boy who gave up his only treasure without being asked. You didn't know it, he said quietly, but you showed me what I lost. I didn't know what to say. I felt guilty. Like I was standing in the middle of a family I didn't belong to, holding a truth that could destroy it. I don't want revenge, he said suddenly, looking straight at me. I want justice. The word sat heavy between us. I won't punish them with anger, he continued. I'll punish them with truth. That night I went home with a knot in my stomach, because I realized something terrifying. The man who once tested strangers for theft was now preparing to test his own blood. And when that test was over, nothing would ever be the same. Mr. Sterling didn't rush his revenge. That was the first thing that scared me. He didn't yell at his children. He didn't threaten lawsuits. He didn't confront anyone in anger. Instead, he became calm, focused, precise. He started organizing his life the way someone cleans a wound before surgery. Quietly, thoroughly, with no room for mistakes. Lawyers came and went, not loudly, discreetly, always through the side entrance. Files were reviewed, accounts audited, every transaction traced back to its source. Nothing dramatic, just facts stacking up one by one. I watched from the sidelines, unsure where I belonged. Sometimes he'd call me into the library while he worked. I'd sit across from him, pretending to read while he marked documents with a steady hand. He never asked me for advice, never pulled me into decisions, but he talked. It's not about money, about disappointment. I thought being a good provider was enough, he said once, not looking up. I thought love came automatically with comfort. He paused, then added quietly, I was wrong. When the time came, he didn't summon his children to yell at them. He invited them to dinner. They arrived dressed well, smiling, confident. They talked about markets, vacations, plans for the future. Not once did they ask how he was feeling. Not once did they notice how thin he'd become. I sat at the far end of the table, invisible again. After dessert, he cleared his throat. I've made some changes, he said calmly, to my estate. The room stilled. They leaned in, interested now. He didn't accuse them, he didn't raise his voice. He simply slid copies of documents across the table. Bank statements, transfers, proof. One of them laughed nervously. This is a mistake. It isn't, he replied. Another tried anger. You don't understand modern finance. He nodded, I understand theft. Silence fell hard. He didn't disown them. He didn't disinherit them entirely. He did something worse. He reduced them to exactly what they had earned. Trust funds they already had, no control, no influence, no legacy. The rest, he said, folding his hands, will go to someone who showed me what honesty looks like. Their eyes turned to me, confused, furious, disgusted. That was the moment their pride collapsed. Not because they lost money, but because they lost the story they told themselves about who deserved it. No shouting followed, no dramatic exits. Just the quiet sound of people realizing they could never undo what they had revealed. Mr. Sterling watched them leave without triumph on his face. Only relief. And that's when I understood. This wasn't revenge fueled by hate. It was justice delivered by clarity. And clarity, once revealed, cannot be taken back. Mr. Sterling died 3 years later. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly in his sleep, in the same chair where everything had begun. The call came early in the morning. I remember staring at my phone for a long time before answering, like if I waited long enough it wouldn't be true. My mother stood in the doorway, already knowing. She always knew before words arrived. The house felt different without him. Not empty. Still, like a place that had finished saying what it needed to say. At the reading of the will, I didn't sit at the front. I stayed near the window, watching dust move through the sunlight. His children sat together, dressed in black, whispering with the kind of impatience grief doesn't soften. When my name was read, the room shifted. I felt every eye turn toward me, suspicion, anger, disbelief. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Afterward, when everyone left, I walked back into the library alone. The chair was still there, the fire was cold, the clock had stopped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the toy car. He had returned it to me a year before he died. One wheel repaired with a tiny piece of gold, not flashy, just enough to make it whole again. I didn't fix it because it was broken, he'd told me. I fixed it because it mattered to you. I placed the car on the table beside the chair. I thought about that day in the rain, about my mother's shaking hands, about the envelope of money I never touched, about how close everything came to collapsing. People call what happened justice. Some call it revenge. But standing there, all I felt was clarity. He didn't give me his wealth because I was better than his children. He gave it because I reminded him who he wanted to be before bitterness took over. I didn't win by taking something from others. I won by refusing to become what the world expected me to be. Before I left, I looked at the chair one last time. Safe now, I whispered. And for the first time, I meant all of us. If you stayed until the end, thank you. This isn't a story about money. It never was. It's about the moments where no one is watching, and the choices we make anyway. I didn't know I was being tested that day. I didn't know kindness could change the direction of a life. I just knew someone looked cold. Maybe you've been underestimated. Maybe you've been tested unfairly. Maybe someone expected you to become smaller, harder, or bitter. You don't have to. If this story made you feel something, share your thoughts in the comments. I read them, truly. And if you want more real stories about quiet strength, justice without violence, and choices that matter, subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the smallest actions leave the deepest marks. Thank you for listening.